It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Go follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412. If you're over on YouTube, they're scrolling across the ticker. We're on all platforms. So just go search Around the 412 everywhere you are on social media. While you're listening to the show, whether that is over on YouTube or if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast, go check out the description of the show. We have the link to our friend Haley Wagner's small business, Everything Custom Designs. She does customized clothing for you. She can also do customized Around the 412 merch if you're into that. Smitty's got some of that. She's also recently doing some new tumblers, cups, mugs, that sort of stuff as well, along with the customized clothing. So you can go check that out at the Facebook link in our description of the show, Everything Custom Designs. Also, go check out, if you're watching on YouTube, it is above my head. It is Keeks Barbershop. He's our earliest sponsor. We've been with him the entire time. It is Keeks Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's it.
No correction needed.
I've got it down. You can also check him out at the Cut app. You can download the Cut, search Keeks Barbershop, and you can schedule a cut. That's who Smitty goes to. I would go to him if I didn't have my other barber, and if I lived in Oklahoma, or if I didn't live in Oklahoma. There's a few asterisks along the lines with that. He knows. But go check him out. This is the Penguin Show, and I'm just going to open it up. The Urban Dictionary defines hopium as the metaphorical substance that causes people to believe in a false hope. It is often paired with copium. Opposed to copium, which represents the rationalization of the current situation, hopium represents the belief that the situation will someday improve. Are we officially, as of, and for those who are watching over on YouTube, you'll know more so than the people that are just listening on the podcast forums, we're in different clothes. That's not necessarily normal for a podcast during a week, because we normally record all of our shows on one night, but we decided with the gravity of this Washington game that just took place on Thursday night that we needed to record after that game, because our show could be completely different one way or the other with the outcome of that game. The Penguins win against Washington on Thursday night in Washington, D.C., 4-1. Are we officially in the hopium stage?
I think so. I mean, a 4-1 win again. This is a 4-point game. Most teams have to wait until the playoffs for their playoff lives to start. The Penguins have been playing playoff games for a while now, and it was another one tonight. Easily the biggest game of the season that they've had up to this point. Alex Nedeljkovic was awesome. I mean, there was points in that game where it just felt like the Penguins were just kind of going through the motions, just holding on. But Nedeljkovic was strong throughout. And if we were recorded earlier in the week, would have said the same thing. But I think waiting till after this game, getting one more performance solidifies it. This is his net the rest of the way. I mean, as far as the Penguins end up going, you can't put Jarry back in there above Nedeljkovic. Nedeljkovic has just been that good. It's a shame. It just seems like there's always something that happens with Jarry that makes him lose the net that isn't necessarily always even performance related. But Nedeljkovic has been this good, and I think it's his net for the time being. And I would have him, finish out the season as the number one goalie. What's your thought on that? I mean, you said you agree, but to expand upon.
I do agree. I think that the situation the Penguins are in, you're full in playoff mode now. And we have said in past shows, the past several weeks, especially once the Jake Gensel trade was solidified, that we weren't interested in winning anymore. We were interested in finishing bottom 10, and we both admitted that was the first time that for a Pittsburgh team, we were openly feeling like they're better off losing than they were winning the games. Obviously, the Penguins did not listen, and I'm not going to complain about that. But they've been playing some very good hockey. They've won 3 games in a row so far. And 3 games in a row for their first time in over a month. I heard Josh Getzoff, friend of the show, by the way, announced that as the Penguins were winning on Thursday night. I think it's nuts that is the case. But the fact that the Penguins played themselves into the situation is in part of Alex Nedeljkovic's performance. And I don't want to relate it exactly to this, but I will, in the sense that imagine back in 2016. I mean, you saw what happened whenever it was Matt Murray's net. Matt Murray was playing as the better goalie at the time, and it wasn't necessarily Fleury's fault because they opened the season, or they opened the playoffs, with him being injured. But they go to Fleury in one game against Tampa Bay. They lose that game, and then they immediately go back to Murray. And Murray is the starting goaltender. Obviously, the situations are very different. They're not even in the playoffs yet. But I feel similarly with that I do with Nedeljkovic and Jarry. I think that you have to ride the hot hand. You are all in on making the playoffs now. I don't know the actual standings part, like if it's even realistic, if it's more realistic that they could finish bottom 10, or if it's more realistic that finish in a wild card. But I get the sense that the Penguins are still all in on this wild card spot. Very evident of the game on Thursday night. And if you're going to do so, I think you need to rely on Alex Nedeljkovic to take you there, because quite frankly, even though Jarry, not necessarily his fault, he had got injured, but he had struggled a little bit recently, and Nedeljkovic has been the better goaltender as of late. So if you're serious about getting into the playoffs, you want to give your best chance possible, I would continue to ride the hot hand. I'd continue to have Nedeljkovic take you there and hopefully get you that playoff berth. And whenever game one happens in the playoffs, if they do get to that point, Nedeljkovic is your starting goaltender. I hate to take that away from Jarry because of what you mentioned. It seems playoff time, something happens with Jarry, whether it is a bad performance or just injuries that have happened in the past that have dampened his postseason performances for several years. But it is what it is. I mean, you kind of have to just get to that point, and it sucks that it's going to happen for what seems. I think this would be the fourth season in a row if you're going back from 2021, because 2021 he had the meltdown against the Islanders. 2022 they just lost, and he only played in, I think, the game 6 that they lost against the Rangers. 2023 he didn't make the playoffs, and 2024. If they make the playoffs, he's not the better goalie, and the better goalie has been in net winning you these games to get you to the playoffs. I think it's an easy answer to go to Nedeljkovic.
So they're right now 12th worst, but the thing is they're also 4 points ahead of even the 11th. Yeah. So like I'll be honest, it seems like it's going to be playoffs, or like I don't think that they're going to finish in the bottom 10 at this point, to be quite honest with you. So at this point, we should be all in on them making the playoffs. And I think at this point, like I was anyway, just based off the way that they've kind of rallied these last couple games. Like I just wish it would have come sooner. Like I'm not one to like question effort or anything like that, but like I feel like they've kind of rallied these last few games in a way that I wasn't necessarily seeing prior. So I don't know what it's been, but
I don't think that's a stretch at all. I mean, look at the.
I know. I hate to question. I hate to be one of those people that's like, oh, they're not even trying. Like because I can't tell, like for the most part, if that's taking place or not when guys are packing it in, or if it's just they're getting outplayed that much, like because they're not good.
Yeah, I mean that's fair, but I just look at those games post trade deadline when the Jake Gensel trade was solidified. That trade definitely affected this team, whether it was subconsciously or they were actually vocal about how it affected this team. Those are two different things, but I definitely think that it had an effect on how they were playing on the ice. And maybe it is just the leadership from your captain and the other leaders on the team that pulled you out of it. And maybe it's just the rest of the team rallying around your leaders, because some of those guys that were struggling the most around that time were the leaders on your team, were your better players. So maybe the other teammates were rallying around those guys, and now they've been putting together strong performances in the net, in the D zone, and offensively, and you're on a 3-game win streak, and now you're putting yourself into position that you could be in postseason play, which is 2 weeks ago we didn't even think was going to be possible. So the fact that they're able to play themselves into this position, that just speaks to the credit of these players, because no matter what the fans thought, what management thought, they never gave up, and I got to tip my hat and give credit where it's due.
So to that point, how much of a spark has it been? Because you were talking about maybe there was a little bit of a lull there post Jake Gensel trade. The guy coming back in that trade, Michael Bunting, what he has done, maybe after seeing the way that he fit, they were like, okay, like obviously we do miss Jake, but we can get behind this guy too. Like this guy's here now, and look at the effort that he's putting forth. Because that was a guy right away. I feel like we noticed his impact, even when the team wasn't performing well. I feel like Michael Bunting, we were like, right away, like this guy brings an element that we just haven't seen with this team. And you're noticing him at the very least every single night. So, how much does that maybe play a factor too, where they're kind of buying in on him? Like it took them being like, okay, Jake's not here anymore. We miss Jake. Now we got this other guy. How's he going to fit in? And then he fits in the way that he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's fitting great, and we've talked about that, but I think that it's definitely rejuvenated, maybe not just the entire team for Michael Bunting, but more specifically that second line. I mean, there was times, and we've talked about how Gino didn't seem like the same player. It seemed like early on in the season, he and Riley Smith had some sort of chemistry for like a month, but that went away, and those players were kind of cold for a good chunk of the season. Not necessarily playing bad, but not up to the level of what you would have expected from Malkin. And I think that having Bunting down there and the style of play that he brings, getting in front of the net and causing chaos in there, and we kind of related, not exactly related it to Patrick Hornquist, but he's probably the closest thing they've had to that type of player since Patrick Hornquist left for the Florida Panthers. And so to have that type of player with Malkin, I think has rejuvenated that second line as well. And in 15 games with the Penguins, Michael Bunting has now had 4 goals and 10 points, which if you're going over an 82 game average, that would put him at 4th on the team in points over 82 games at that pace, because he would only be behind Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and what Jake
What
Gensel
is that? Like a 50?
It's around
something?
like 54, 55 points.
Yeah.
It's like 54 points something. But he would be ahead of Brian Rust. He would be only behind Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, and Jake Gensel, but Jake Gensel's gone. So he'd only be behind Malkin and Crosby at that pace. And as far as goals goes, he would be only behind those same guys: Crosby, Malkin, Jake Gensel, and then throw in Brian Rust, who has 26 goals on the season as well. He's on pace for like 21, 22 goals over that pace. If they can get that type of performance from Michael Bunting, I think I'm going to be higher on the trade than I was whenever it actually happened. I think that this was more the player itself is growing on me as time goes on post Jake Gensel trade. Obviously, miss Jake Gensel. Would love to have him on this team, especially for what they're doing lately. It's almost like, why weren't they doing this with Jake Gensel instead of with Michael Bunting? But at the same time, with that trade taking place, if this is what you're going to get from Michael Bunting, I can see how the Penguins can grow around him and around the rest of this team, and how if you're going into next season still thinking you're a contender, they're starting to show that they can play like one. And they've played some really good hockey in their last few games. Michael Bunting's been a good piece of that. And I think that initially, whenever the trade happened, he wasn't even the main piece in the trade. But now he is performing like he's been in the main piece of the trade. It's been really impressive.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at them as independent thoughts at this point, because like I do still wish that we just didn't trade Jake Gensel, but Michael Bunting was a player that I would have been talking about. I don't know if about pounding the table for, but certainly was interested last free agency before he signed in Carolina, and I thought there was a good shot of him becoming a Penguin just because of the Dubas connection, which is probably why Dubas was hell bent on getting him in a trade return for Jake Gensel. But yeah, I mean, knowing that we have this guy for a couple more seasons locked up too at like a relatively reasonable price tag, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's fair. I'm not going to say like it's a steal, especially because we're still talking about a relatively small sample size.
I think it's a fair number. It's not great. It's not bad either.
Yeah. But still, like, this is a guy that we've seen play in the top 6. I don't think that there's any reason that will be different next season. So that kind of checks a box for us. Like, I feel like at the deadline when we traded Gensel, we were looking at it like, man, what happens, this offseason? Like, you're going to have a ton of boxes to check. Well, with what Michael Bunting has given you post Jake Gensel trade, I feel like, okay, maybe we cross getting, a winger for Malkin off that checklist at this point, which would be fantastic. The other side of that, right, is you have seen serious regression from Rickard Rakell. And I know that last year wasn't in Pittsburgh, but still also regression from where he was at in 2022, 2023 to 2023, 24 for Riley Smith, which it wouldn't surprise me if they look to move him in the offseason anyway. So I still think that there very much is the need for somebody in the top 6, but knowing that you have Michael Bunting here eliminates at least one of those, because you feel like he fills a void that you might have thought you had once you traded Jake Gensel.
Yeah, I mean, despite what happens the rest of the season, And originally my mindset was that they were going to miss the playoffs, and at the time, hopefully finish within the bottom 10. But that's just out the window. They're not going to have a first-round pick this year. But so that still leaves a lot of work to be done this offseason. And I look at several guys that are on this roster, like looking at their cap friendly right now. Like I think Riley Smith, and you were just talking about him, I feel like that's an easy one to move on from. There's like other guys like that you could move on from if you really wanted to, like Lars Eller. He's been good for you, and I wouldn't mind if he was back next year, but I could see them trying to move on from him. $2.45 million on the books. I think that obviously the main one, Ryan Graves, you're not going to be able to do anything, but that's going to be the biggest ticket item for getting out of here in Pittsburgh. And you're just going to have to try to attach something to him. And I wonder if the goalie situation going into the postseason too, if you're riding Nedeljkovic and say he even wins you a playoff series, if you do make the playoffs, what
we're
kind
talking about the Steelers quarterbacks right now? Like we're like, oh, it's Tristan Jarry in the Kenny Pickett spot. Can you go back to him?
It's kind of similar, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, you would think that if you're relating the two, Tristan Jarry would be like Kenny Pickett in the sense that obviously Kenny Pickett doesn't have that big contract, but he was the first round quarterback. He was the quote unquote incumbent starter. So you would think that it would be natural to go back to him, but you're playing better with the Mason Rudolph and Alex Nedeljkovic. So it's hard to have that. And once you get to the offseason, it's like, do we want Alex Nedeljkovic? Do we want Mason Rudolph to be our starter? Or should we go back to Kenny Pickett with Tristan Jarry? I think that they could look to move Tristan Jarry this offseason. And I think they're definitely going to look to move him because I don't think that they're going to love that cap number for especially the term. But I think that it creates an interesting conversation for what you do with your goaltenders, especially if you get to the postseason with Nedeljkovic and say he wins you a playoff series, the first playoff series the Penguins would have won since 2018. How do you not re-sign that guy in that sense? That would be tough too. And so I think
how do
it will
you
be
not
a very
give him the net going into the next season?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it'll be a very interesting conversation to have this summer. It's going to be very interesting to see what these last 6 games are going to have. What's that?
Which means if this is the Steelers quarterback situation, neither of these guys are going to be on the roster.
Yeah, neither of them are going to be on the roster next year. We're going to have a new goaltender.
2 different ones. We're going to sign somebody and trade for somebody.
No. We're going to sign somebody, and then we're just going to call up what's the homeboy's name?
Blomqvist.
Yoel Blomqvist. Yeah. Yep. We'll just call him up, and that'll be your goalie tandem. But
I mean,
man,
I listen. That's kind of the way that I would probably ideally be mapping out the offseason. Of course, it takes 2 to tango. Can you find a suitor for Tristan Jarry, still get somewhat fair value back, and not be like attaching assets to get rid of him? I don't think like it's at that point where he's like that diminished, where you're talking about having to. Yeah. So I'm kind of like my ideal scenario is that they do trade Tristan Jarry, re-sign Nedeljkovic, and it is his net into like with Yoel Blomqvist kind of being brought up as like either a backup 1B situation, but Nedeljkovic isn't obviously a long-term solution either. So like you're getting Blomqvist's feet wet with Nedeljkovic also here, and then it eventually becomes his net probably the following season. Even if it's just role reversal the following one, like maybe Nedeljkovic is here for 2 years, but like their roles reverse in that second year.
Yeah, I can think that would be an ideal scenario. I mean, and this is like no hate to Tristan Jarry. I don't think that, like you mentioned, he hasn't been that bad at all.
He didn't give himself that contract.
He had a
for
really
most
good
of the year,
season.
I thought
he was. Is he still leading the league in shutouts this season? I feel like he has to be. But he's had a really good season. But the contract itself is not something that you love as a Penguins fan. That's something that you would want to get rid of. I just want to move this conversation back to.
I mean, he's tied for the lead with Connor Ingram.
Tied with the league. Okay. So I want to move the conversation back to the playoffs real quick because the Penguins had a 29-point swing in the playoff percentage against the Capitals. So their playoffs chances went up 8.5% up to 23.2% chance to make the playoffs, according to MoneyPuck.com. And the Capitals dropped 15.3% to 13.9% to make the playoffs. Obviously Capitals still have better situation right now, but the Penguins are rising, and they've been rising over these last 3 games. And with some of the opponents that I mean, they play the Islanders the last game of the season. Could we get into a scenario where that game is what decides who goes to the postseason?
I love the. I mean, that would be so fun. Like, obviously, I mean, I might have a heart attack watching that game take place.
And the game's in New York.
Yeah, but like, just the. I mean, that's what you are. That's what you want to watch. That's what you play for. Those types of. I've mentioned pretty much every game for the Penguins has been a playoff game. Basically, the last 3, including tonight. That one, though, man, that's Game 7 Stanley Cup Finals before the playoffs start.
Yeah. And tonight's game, Thursday night's game, really felt, and I don't know if it was for you as well, but like the first 2 periods definitely felt more intense than a lot of the Penguins games this season. But it wasn't until that third period for me where it truly felt like this is a game from those 2016, 17.
Well, it seemed like the Caps
seasons.
were sleepwalking until the third period too, so that probably played into
Which is
it.
funny because they were out shooting us by a ton, but it didn't really feel like it.
Yeah, but like, I mean, they were just Nedeljkovic did have to make some really nice saves. That one sequence was insane right before he gave up the power play goal to Ovi, where like Brian Rust also almost scored a shorthanded goal 5-on-3.
Dude,
Like
that was in
entire
Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
the place would have been going nuts.
But yeah, I don't know. I just didn't feel like the Caps had much energy until the third period, despite what the shot total was in the first period and halfway through the second or whatever it was at. But I mean, I'm excited to see how the rest of the stretch goes, whatever it might be. I do feel like, though, I mean, we I don't know if it's worth mentioning. Like, I'm not trying to downplay this, but like, we're really only having this conversation because of how bad the bottom of the East is. Like, there's not a team that probably belongs in the playoffs as the second wild card, but one team is going to make it. So
yeah, that's a fair point.
Who's the best of the worst? Basically, is what's going to happen here with the second wild card. Because I mean, heck, I guess you could still say even that third spot in the Metro with the Flyers. It just
I mean the Flyers are only. I mean they're tied in points with the Islanders at 83.
Right.
They just have the advantage. So it's the Metro. I guess Flyers, is not as strong.
But between the Flyers, Caps, Red Wings, Islanders, and Penguins, you're talking about 2 of those teams making the playoffs. And realistically, none of them are very good. And I don't know who the biggest threat to actually go in and win. I guess whoever plays the best down the stretch here, because it seems like all teams are kind of backing their way in at this point. Like, the only reason the Penguins have been able to make up this ground is because everybody else has been losing. So I don't know. None of these teams, if I was a bystander or whoever's going to come in here, who would they be playing right now? The Rangers, right?
If they were the second wild card, they would play the Rangers. Yes.
So, yeah, if I'm the Rangers, I'm not.
Hey, if they were able to manage to sneak into that third spot in the Metro, I mean, if they're saying that they're catching the Islanders, they can definitely catch the Flyers. You'd be playing Jake Gensel in the first round.
Oh wow, that would be wild. To trade him and basically feel like the season that's it. Like, you're basically.
And then Michael Bunting sends Jake Gensel home in OT.
But like, I know that this is a Penguin show. We want to keep it Penguin centric, but realistically, if you're the Rangers, who out of these teams is the worst draw for you? I mean, I'm almost thinking the Islanders, just because like Sorokin, like I'm looking at the goalie, probably for a 7-game series.
Yeah, out of recent play, I would agree with you. I think the Islanders are. Although looking at past, I mean, recently the Penguins did lose to them 7-4. I understand that the Penguins were that was during that stretch where they were kind of in the lull post trade deadline. But what are some? I want to look at their more recent or their season games against the Rangers. I'm just trying to look through their schedule right now to see what they've done this season against them. They lost 1-0 back in November. They also, or why can I not see? They also beat them 5-2 most recently. I don't know. I think that if you're the Rangers, are you most afraid to play the Penguins?
Maybe
that's recency bias, but
here's the thing. I feel like the Islanders have the best chance of goalieing them because of Sorokin. The Penguins have the best chance of turning into a track meet. So
that's
those
true.
to me are the two teams that I would least want to play if I was the Rangers, but for very different reasons.
I feel like to me the Capitals are the least threatening team.
Yeah, I don't.
And it's surprising to me that they've risen to the spot that they're currently in, still fighting for a playoff spot, because I just thought they were dead in the water.
Yeah.
To be fair, I
Darcy
also thought the
Kemper's been
Penguins were dead in
awful.
the water as too. So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of putting a foot in my mouth.
Kemper's been awful. Charlie Lindgren, who we saw tonight, has been the number one goalie. He has more starts this year, and he's been better. Ovi's, was nowhere to be seen for the better part of the first couple months of the season, but he's gotten hot as of late.
Of course, he scores against the Penguins.
Yeah, of course. I'm surprised Tom Wilson didn't also score tonight. But yeah, I mean, you go up and down that roster. I don't see it. I know that they've gotten two guys that I wanted the Penguins to sign. Was it 2 years ago in free agency and didn't end up with? And both of them signed with Washington. They provided good value for them. Dylan Strome actually leads them in points, 62 points this year, 26 goals and 36 assists. And then Sonny Milano, who, 13 goals, 7 assists, just 20 points. But he was, I think last year he had 20 plus and then got a new deal. But yeah, you look at that roster, not at all impressive. Obviously, the Nick Backstrom situation, going back to they moved on from Kuznetsov, who had been awful for them. Like it's just they're not that same team that won the cup. They're very far removed. Even they're farther removed from their cup team than the Penguins are.
Like in terms of player turnover,
everything, in my opinion. Also, like the state of the team. I understand that, like they just don't look like anything like that team. I think the Penguins more resemble those Penguins than the Caps resemble those Caps.
I can agree with that. I can get behind that. Well, the Penguins are going to have a tough stretch to close out the season, though. It's not going to be easy. If they're going to make this postseason, they're going to earn it.
Right. But that's kind of the way it has to be. They got two of these games, like we mentioned, are going to be 4-point games, and the Red Wings and Islanders, who are two teams in front of them. But yeah, even their games against the other teams that they're not necessarily chasing, the Lightning, the Maple Leafs, the Bruins, and the Predators. What a random game, but I know the Islanders also play them at the end of the year here in this mix. So yeah,
Lightning also in a playoff spot.
Lightning and Leafs. By the time that we talk next week, they're going to have played the Lightning and Leafs. And if they can walk out of that with 3 out of the 4 possible points, I'll feel good. I'll feel good about it.
I would feel really good about that as well.
I don't know. That's the thing. It's like at this point when you're chasing points like this, can they afford to lose another game in regulation?
With how many teams they're playing against, no. I guess if you're looking at there's a potential of 2 spots open. And 4 teams are fighting for 2 of the spots. 4 teams or I guess 5 teams are fighting for 3 of the spots because you have to throw the Red Wings in there to fight in for the second wild card spot. But 4 of the teams are fighting for that 3rd place in the Metro spot. I don't think that they can. I think that you have to get at least a point out of every single game that you go into. And if you lose a game in regulation, it can only be 1. And it can't be in either of those Red Wings or Islanders games.
Oh, right.
You have to win both of those games in regulation. You have to.
I'm almost thinking if they're going to drop a game, it's got to be the Predators, like a inconsequential team in the Western Conference.
Yeah. Or like Boston, where it just doesn't matter because they're so far ahead anyway. It doesn't affect anything.
I was just wondering if it came down to like some really weird tiebreakers.
I guess that's true.
Would it have an impact?
Yeah, it'd be better to lose to the Predators then. But yeah, you can't afford to lose much. It's razor thin margins right now, and you saw what razor thin margins can do last season.
Like, what is the worst? I mean, not. What is the worst they can go and still make the playoffs in your mind? Like 4-0-2, like, or do you think?
I mean, even at 4-0-2, you're relying on a lot of teams to be losing games because if you lose 2 games in overtime, you're still relying on at least 3 of the teams to finish worse.
You get 10 more points, so you would be at
like you can finish 4-0-2, but like those 2 couldn't happen against the Red Wings and Islanders. You have to win both those in regulation.
Right? Yeah. Any of these situations that we're talking about, that's the case, in my opinion. I mean, the Penguins also do have 1 more game played than the Capitals. Should mention that.
Yeah.
So the Capitals are the team with the game in hand here on everybody. Everybody that we're talking about, the Islanders have one more game played than the Penguins and Red Wings. Flyers are also at 76. Yes, so I mean that third in the Metro also very much up for grabs, just as much as the wild card spot. Actually, even more.
I'm curious. Let's look at the last few games for each of these teams, or the teams that the Red Wings and the Islanders are going to be playing as well. So the Islanders, they actually play the Predators on Saturday, and then they have 2 games against the Rangers. Still, one at home, one away. They also have a game against the Canadiens, a game against the Devils, and then they close out with the Penguins. And then the Red Wings, they on Saturday play. Let's see. They play. Oh no, they don't play on Saturday. They play tomorrow night. They play the Rangers, and then they play the Sabres, Capitals. So that's a 4-point game in that one. Then they play us, the Penguins, Toronto, Canadiens. So if they get through Toronto and they're in a good spot, they've got a good chance of winning their last 2 games of the season. So definitely a softer schedule, in my opinion, than either the Islanders or the Penguins have overall. I mean, you get to play the Sabres and the Canadiens 3 out of your last 7 games. Obviously, the Toronto and the New York and Capitals and Penguins games, especially those Capitals and Penguin games, those are going to have a lot of consequences behind them, and those are 4-point games, 4-point swings. But I think just overall, if you're looking at games that they have easier times with, Sabres, Montreal, the Penguins don't have a game like that, and the Islanders don't really have a game like that either, that they can really rely on a win. So I don't know. It's going to be tough. But like I said, last year you saw what razor-thin margins do, and if you play around with them. Look at that Blackhawks game. All the Penguins had to do was win, and they screw around, and then they play the last game of the season, first meaningless hockey game in 20 years that team has played. So it's tough, but they've been playing good hockey. So it's like I said at the beginning of the show, they've instilled the hopium. Up next is the copium if the bad parts happen, but right now we have the hopium, and we're going to continue to have the hopium through this weekend against Tampa Bay and against Toronto before we talk next week. But it's exciting. It's exciting that they're back into a playoff spot. I genuinely did not think they were going to get here.
No, I did not either. And I think that you could tell within the switch in their conversation from last week to this week that that's exactly where we are. So, going to be fun to see how it plays out. Again, similarly from last week to this week, from this week to next week, by the time that we record, which we already put out, is going to be on Tuesday, just because of the way that the schedules fall for the teams. Could be once again a very different conversation, for better or for worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that'll do it. Be sure to check out the description, Everything Custom Designs, which, by the way, shout out to Haley, because she's actually making me and around the 412 tumbler. I mentioned I wanted to be sure to get one before the draft. She's working on that now. And she's sending some around the 412 merch to our boy Pat after coming on the show. If you guys missed it, exclusive interview with Pat Fryermuth on the channel. Be sure to go check that out. Awesome. Sat down with us for 35 minutes, which was awesome. Great conversation. Talked a lot about a lot of different things, including the quarterback situation, which I'm sure everybody wanted to get his thoughts on. Has already spent time with Russell Wilson, as well as some of the other receivers, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, out in San Diego. So if you are also a Steelers fan, be sure to check out that conversation. It was great. We will link that in the description of this as well. And then above Tyler, Keats Barbershop, also scrolling at the bottom, as always, Keats Barbershop, located at 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Christian, Tony, Ashley, they do a great job over there. Very old school vibe. As soon as you walk in, Christian's been supporting us since the beginning, so we love to support him back. Again, Keats Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Download the app The Cut and book an appointment with him today. Other than that, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I know we've gotten a lot of new subscribers coming in from doing the show with Pat, so we appreciate that. If you guys came from that show and you're also Penguins fans, welcome. we do one of these every single week. So be sure to tap in with us. If you hit that notification bell, you'll know exactly when we post a new episode of the show. Been working on some other things as well. So we'll see if we can make something else happen during this off season. The wheels are always going in this mind. So we'll see what we can cook up. But for Tyler, for Smitty, this has been the Round the 412 Penguins show, even though we've talked mainly about the Steelers down the stretch here. This is the Round the 412 Penguins show. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.